My name is Diana. I'm 32, and I run operations for a restaurant group that seats 3,000 people a week across 4 locations. I know how a check moves from kitchen to table the way most people know how to tie their shoes. So when my parents called after 3 years of total silence and invited me to dinner to make amends, I should have asked one question before I said yes. Who's really at that table? I didn't ask. I drove 40 minutes to the Belvedere, walked through the front doors, and found 16 members of my family already seated around a long table covered in lobster tails, Wagyu steaks, and a $400 bottle of Bordeaux they'd started pouring before I pulled into the parking lot. My father looked up from the head of the table, smiled, and said what I'd spent my whole life earning. "You're paying, right? You owe us that much." He thought he'd cornered me. He hadn't counted on the 2 sentences I was about to whisper to our waiter, or on what his own credit card was about to tell the entire family 15 minutes later. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where ordinary people face impossible family moments and walk out with their dignity intact. If you've ever been the one expected to pay, to fix, to stay quiet, this story is for you. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. But let me back up a few weeks. Before the dinner. Before the parking lot full of cars I recognized. Before my father tried to hand me a bill the size of a mortgage payment. I need to tell you who I was the morning the invitation arrived, because that's the version of me they were counting on, and the version I'd already stopped being. I manage 4 restaurants. Not own. Manage. I built my way up from bussing tables at a steakhouse in Knoxville when I was 17, still smelling like fryer oil on the school bus the next morning. Hostess at 19. Server at 21. Floor manager by 24. Regional operations director by 30. I'm not rich. I have a 2-bedroom condo that's paid off, a retirement account I never touch, and exactly one indulgence: sparkling water. Still or sparkling, that's what I order when I eat out, every single time. My staff thinks it's a quirk. It's not. When you grow up paying for everyone else's steak, you learn to keep your own tab small enough to walk away from. That morning, I was in my office reviewing a vendor contract for imported olive oil, the kind of Tuesday that makes you forget not everyone's life runs on spreadsheets and PARs. My phone buzzed. I glanced down and felt something cold settle behind my ribs. 3 years of silence, and there it was, a notification from the group chat I'd been removed from the day I became the family's villain. Family had added me back. I stared at that notification for a full minute before I opened it. Family. The little red heart emoji my mother had picked out 6 years ago when she created the group, back when it was used for sharing Thanksgiving recipes and photos of Brooke's dog. I hadn't seen that heart in 3 years. The chat history was clean. Nothing above my mother's newest message, which meant they'd either cleared it or, more likely, they had a second group without me the whole time. Mom's message was warm, careful, almost rehearsed. She said she and Dad had been doing a lot of reflecting, and wanted to invite me to dinner at the Belvedere to start healing as a family. Just the 4 of us, she wrote. Her, Dad, me, and Brooke. A small dinner, a fresh start. Then a second message, 30 seconds later, with the line that should have told me everything. Family takes care of family, sweetheart. It's time we remembered that. Family takes care of family. She used to say that when I was 19, and she needed my server tips to cover the electric bill. She said it when I was 23, and Dad needed a cosigner on the truck. She said it when Brooke's first apartment fell through and I quietly paid the deposit. Family takes care of family had always meant one thing in my house: Diana takes care of family. I read the message twice. I noticed my mother hadn't said sorry. She hadn't said, "We were wrong." She'd said it was time to heal. Passive voice. No subject. No one responsible. I typed back, "I'll be there." Then I set my phone face down on the desk and went back to the olive oil contract, pretending my hands weren't shaking. 3 years ago, my sister Brooke decided to open a cafe. Not a business plan, not a market study. A cafe, because she'd seen one in Charleston with exposed brick and a matcha menu and thought, I could do that. She was 26, had never managed so much as a lemonade stand, and needed a $75,000 small business loan. The bank said yes, with a cosigner. That cosigner was supposed to be me. Mom called on a Sunday. Dad sat beside her, arms folded, already angry before I'd answered. Brooke needed the loan. The cafe was her dream. I had good credit, a stable job, a history of saying yes. Just sign the papers, Diana. I asked to see the business plan first. Brooke didn't have one. I asked about her projected margins, her lease terms, her supplier contracts. Brooke stared at me like I'd insulted her cooking. Mom's voice went flat. She's your sister. You don't need a spreadsheet to love your sister. I said no. Not because I didn't love Brooke, I did. But I'd spent enough years in the restaurant industry watching people pour savings into concepts with no foundation. And I knew what $75,000 of someone else's debt looks like at 3 a.m. when the cafe is dark and the loan is still due. Dad stood up. He pointed at the door and said the thing that closed it for 3 years. If you won't help this family, you're not part of it. I drove home. The next morning, I'd been removed from family. Nobody called. Nobody texted. For 3 years, I was the daughter who loved money more than her own sister. Here's the part that's hard to admit. The silence almost broke me. Not because they were right. I knew they weren't. Because I missed being needed. That's the real wound. And it took me 2 years and a therapist named Dr. Kwan to name it properly. I had been the family fixer since I was 17. First paycheck went to groceries. Tax refund went to Mom's dental work. When Dad's transmission blew, I paid for the rebuild and told him it was covered under warranty because I knew he'd never accept a handout from his 22-year-old daughter. When Brooke got married, I covered the florist, the photographer, and half the reception. And I smiled while Mom gave the toast about raising 2 strong girls. 2 strong girls. 1 bill. I didn't do it because I'm generous. I did it because I'd learned, somewhere around age 15, that the fastest way to keep the peace in my family was to make sure nobody had to ask twice. Ask once. Diana pays. Everyone's happy. Dinner is quiet. I trained them. I taught my parents that my wallet was a vending machine. Insert guilt, receive check. And when the machine finally said out of order, they didn't troubleshoot it. They unplugged it and walked away. So when Mom's message popped up after 3 years, family takes care of family, sweetheart, I felt the old reflex fire in my chest like a muscle I hadn't stretched in years. Go. Fix it. Pay whatever it costs. Make it quiet again. But I also heard Dr. Kwan's voice, steady as a metronome. You taught them you would always pay. That was your mistake to fix. Not by paying more, but by stopping. My coworker Jess told me not to go. She sat across from me at lunch the day after the invitation and said, "Diana, this has ambush written all over it." And I remember laughing because Jess had never even met my family, and she could see it clearer than I could. My sous chef Marco said the same thing, shorter. Don't. But I'd already decided. Not because I believed them, not because I expected an apology. I wanted to sit across from my parents and find out whether 3 years had changed anything, or whether the silence had just been a longer version of the same conversation we'd always had, one where I was expected to listen, agree, and pay. I wanted closure, even if closure meant confirming the door was nailed shut. There was something else too, and I'm going to be honest about it because I think some of you will understand. I missed my mother. Not the mother who orchestrated, not the one who kept score. The one who taught me to make cornbread in a cast-iron skillet when I was 9 and sang along with Dolly Parton while the butter melted. That mother hadn't called in 3 years either, but some nights I still heard the Dolly Parton. So I told Jess I was going. I told Marco I'd be fine. I told myself the same thing and almost believed it. I set one rule. 1 dinner, civil, no money, and if it felt wrong, I'd leave before dessert. I wrote it on a sticky note and pressed it to my steering wheel the morning of. 1 dinner, then home. That sticky note was still there when I pulled into the Belvedere's parking lot and counted the cars. I dressed simple on purpose. Black slacks, a gray blouse I wear to vendor meetings, flat shoes. No jewelry except the small silver watch I bought myself the year I made regional director. Not because I wanted to impress anyone, but because I'd earned it and it kept good time, and that felt like enough. I didn't want to walk into the Belvedere looking like I was performing. My family already thought I flaunted my success. The truth was, I drove a 9-year-old Honda and meal prepped on Sundays like half of America. The drive took 40 minutes. I played no music. My hands stayed at 10 and 2. Somewhere around the highway merge, my stomach started to tighten in a way I recognized. The same feeling I get when a walk-in cooler fails on a Friday night, and I know the next 6 hours are going to hurt. Instinct. My body knew something my brain was still negotiating with. I almost turned around at the exit ramp. Almost. But I thought about that cornbread, and I thought about Dr. Kwan's voice, and I kept driving. The Belvedere sat at the end of a strip of shops I hadn't visited in years. The expensive side of town, the kind of place where the parking lot is landscaped and the hostesses wear all black. Dad's truck was in the third row, Mom's sedan next to it. Fine. Then I saw Aunt Linda's white Buick, Uncle Greg's SUV, Brooke's hatchback with the bumper sticker from the cafe that had closed 11 months after it opened. 3 more cars I recognized. 2 I didn't. My stomach dropped before I even opened the door. Just the 4 of us, Mom had written. I counted 9 vehicles. I sat in my car for 2 full minutes, engine off, hands on the wheel, reading that sticky note. 1 dinner, then home. The smart thing would have been to reverse out of the lot and drive the 40 minutes back to my condo and eat leftover soup, and never think about the Mayfield family reunion I hadn't been invited to, or apparently had been invited to without being told the guest list. But I got out. I straightened my blouse. I locked the car and walked toward the entrance because I was 32 years old and I'd spent 3 years learning how not to run, and I was not going to start running again in a restaurant parking lot on a Thursday evening. The front doors were heavy glass with brass handles, the kind that whisper, "Entrees start at $42, before you even see a menu." Inside, the lobby smelled like rosemary and warm bread and money. A hostess in a black dress smiled and checked her screen. "Mayfield?" I nodded. She nodded back. "Your party's already seated." She said it the way hostesses say things when they've been dealing with a large group for an hour and are trying very hard not to look stressed. I recognized the expression. I'd worn it myself 1,000 times. She grabbed a menu, just one, and led me toward the back of the dining room. I could hear them before I could see them. Laughter, clinking glasses, my Aunt Linda's unmistakable cackle cutting through the murmur of every other table. 1 dinner, then home. I turned the corner and saw the table. 16 chairs, every single one filled except the one at the far end, directly across from my father. The table stretched the entire length of the private dining alcove. White linen, heavy silverware, candles in low crystal holders. There were platters I could identify from 10 feet away. Lobster tails fanned across crushed ice, Wagyu sliders on a tiered stand, a charcuterie board the size of a coffee table. And in the center, a bottle of wine I recognized from vendor tastings. A 2016 Saint Emilion Grand Cru, retail around $400, already half empty. They'd been here a while. They'd been ordering hard. The hostess paused at the edge of the alcove and glanced at me with a look that translated perfectly across every restaurant I've ever worked in. "Good luck." Then she leaned closer and said quietly, "Your father put a card down to hold the reservation, just so you know. We require one for parties over 12. I filed that sentence the way I file every operational detail. Silently, completely, permanently. His card was on file. He'd secured the table. And yet, somehow I already knew the bill wasn't supposed to land on him. My mother saw me first. She stood up with both arms open and every head at the table turned. "Diana. Oh, sweetheart, look at you." Applause. Actual applause, like I was a returning soldier and not the daughter they'd ghosted for 1,000 days. Uncle Greg whistled. Aunt Linda dabbed her eyes with a cloth napkin. Brooke raised her wine glass and smiled the kind of smile that has teeth, but no warmth. 16 people, lobster and Wagyu and a $400 bottle of Bordeaux. Just the 4 of us, Mom had written. I sat down. What else do you do when 16 people are watching you and the chair is already pulled out and a waiter is pouring water into your glass before your purse hits the floor? I sat down and I smiled because that's what 15 years of front-of-house training gives you, the ability to smile while your brain is running threat assessment at full speed. Mom settled back into her seat, beaming. We wanted it to be a surprise, the whole family together, just like old times. I thought it was just the 4 of us, I said. Mom waved her hand like she was swatting a fly. Well, once Linda heard, and then Greg, and then your cousin Tara. It just grew. You know how family is? I knew exactly how family was. I scanned the table. Dad sat at the head, carving a Wagyu slider like it was Thanksgiving turkey. Brooke sat to his left, phone in one hand, wine in the other, scrolling something I couldn't see. Aunt Linda and Uncle Greg anchored the middle. Cousins I hadn't spoken to since a Thanksgiving 5 years ago filled the rest. Tyler, Megan, Jake, 2 wives I'd met once, and Aunt Linda's neighbor who I'd never seen before in my life, but who was apparently eating lobster on whatever occasion this was. The wine was flowing. The platters were half demolished. They'd been here at least an hour before I arrived, and they'd ordered everything on the menu that didn't require a second mortgage. Mom leaned across and squeezed my hand. See? Family takes care of family. There it was again. The same 5 words, delivered with the same warm packaging, aimed at the same target. I squeezed back and said nothing. I was counting plates. My father is the kind of man who orders for the table. Not asks. Orders. He waved the waiter over, a young guy barely out of his teens who looked like he was running on caffeine and anxiety, and rattled off additions without glancing at a menu. Another round of the lobster tails. 2 more Wagyu plates. And bring another bottle of that Bordeaux. The Grand Cru. The good one. He said, the good one, loud enough for the tables on either side of us to hear. Dad pulled his credit card from his wallet and held it between 2 fingers like a magician showing the audience a coin before the trick. Put it all on this, he told the waiter. We're celebrating tonight. The waiter, his name tag read Nathan, scribbled and nodded, and disappeared toward the kitchen with the look of someone who desperately wanted a smoke break. I watched my father tuck the card back into his wallet with a little pat, the way you pat a dog that's performed well. Something was off. I'd grown up watching Dad argue over the price of a muffler. I'd seen him return a shirt because the sale tag was missing. Raymond Mayfield did not order $400 bottles of wine. He did not wave credit cards like flags. This was a performance, and it was aimed at me. Look how well we're doing, Diana. Look how little we needed you. Except the car in the parking lot was the same truck from 5 years ago with a dent in the rear quarter panel he'd never fixed. And Mom's handbag, the Coach purse she'd carried since I was in high school, sat on the chair beside her with a cracked strap held together by a safety pin. They were performing. I just didn't know the price of admission yet. The small cuts started around the second bottle. Aunt Linda leaned across Uncle Greg and said, "Must be nice, running all those fancy restaurants while the rest of us clip coupons." She laughed when she said it, the way people laugh when they want you to know they're serious. Cousin Megan asked if I ever felt guilty living so well while my parents were going through a rough patch. I didn't know about a rough patch. Nobody had told me about a rough patch. Brooke, without looking up from her phone, added, "She wouldn't know. She hasn't been around." Each comment landed with the precision of something rehearsed, not scripted exactly, but aligned, the way a choir finds the same note without a conductor. They'd been talking about me, about my absence, my money, my life. And they'd arrived tonight with a shared understanding of the story. Diana left. Diana has plenty. Diana owes. Aunt Linda delivered the thesis statement. She reached across the table, took my hand like she was comforting me at a funeral, and said, "Family doesn't keep score, dear." I almost laughed. Family doesn't keep score. This from a woman who once stopped speaking to her own daughter-in-law for 6 months over a Thanksgiving seating arrangement. I didn't laugh. I pulled my hand back gently and picked up my glass. Sparkling water. The only thing in front of me. The only thing I'd ordered. The contrast was almost funny. 16 people swimming in lobster and Bordeaux, and me with a glass of San Pellegrino sitting at the end of the table like a designated driver at a bachelor party. Nathan, the young waiter, passed behind me and I caught his eye. "Just the water tonight?" he asked, quiet. "Just the water," I said. He nodded like he understood something I hadn't said out loud. "Let me tell you about Nathan. He was maybe 19 or 20, built thin the way restaurant kids are before they learn to eat between rushes. He moved fast but careful, the way new servers do when the table is too big and the order is too complicated and they know one wrong plate means a manager conversation they can't afford. I recognized everything about him because I'd been him. 17 years old, 2 tables deep, learning that the guests who snap their fingers are always the ones who tip the least. He was handling our 16 top alone. Well, almost alone. A busser appeared occasionally to clear plates, but Nathan was running every order, every refill, every, "Excuse me, can we get more butter?" from Aunt Linda, who'd said it 3 times in 20 minutes. He never complained. He never sighed. He refilled my sparkling water without being asked, and when he set the glass back down, he caught me watching the table with an expression I probably should have hidden better. "Long night?" he murmured. I almost told him the truth. Instead, I just said, "You're doing great." He blinked, startled, like he'd forgotten customers could say that. Then he straightened up about half an inch taller and moved on to Uncle Greg's refill. I watched him go and thought about the version of me that used to carry 4 plates up her forearm and cry in the walk-in freezer on the hard nights, That girl had no idea she'd end up on the other side of a table like this, sitting across from the family that made her into a fixer and a funder, being asked without being asked to write one more check. But she'd understand what I was about to do. She'd understand it perfectly. I excused myself to the restroom around the 40-minute mark. I needed 2 minutes without Aunt Linda's commentary and a door I could lock. The Belvedere's restroom was the kind with cloth hand towels and lavender soap and a full-length mirror that made you look slightly better than you felt, which was a neat trick considering I felt like I was digesting glass. I turned on the faucet, pressed cold water against my wrists the way you do when you need your heart rate to cooperate with your brain. Then I saw it. A phone on the edge of the marble countertop, screen still lit, case covered in daisy stickers. Brooke's phone. She must have come in before me and left it when she got distracted. Brooke left things everywhere. It was one of the few traits we shared. I didn't plan to look. I want to be clear about that. But the screen was bright, and the notification banner at the top was from a group chat I'd never been added to, and the preview text was enough to stop my hand mid-reach for the paper towel. The group was called Dinner Plan, 3 members, Mom, Dad, Brooke. The latest message, sent 4 days ago, was from Mom. The preview showed the words I can still recite from memory. Don't tell Diana it's everyone. She won't dare. The message cut off at the banner's edge. My pulse was steady. My hands were dry. I picked up the phone the way I'd pick up a vendor invoice that didn't add up. Not angry, not surprised, just confirming what the numbers already told me. I scrolled up. The full message read, "Don't tell Diana it's everyone. Once she's there with the whole family watching, she won't dare say no. She never could handle a scene." Below it, Dad had replied, "Just make sure she sits at my end. I'll handle the ask." Brooke's contribution, timestamped 2 minutes later. "Order the good stuff before she gets there. Once it's on the table, she can't exactly send it back, lol." I kept scrolling. 3 weeks of messages. Mom coordinating RSVPs. Linda's in, Greg's in, Megan says yes if there's wine. Dad, quieter, mostly logistical. Parking, reservation time, how to frame the invitation so it sounded casual. Then the messages that turned my stomach cold. Mom, 10 days ago. The bank called again Thursday, we need to figure out something before June. Dad. Diana can cover us through spring. She's got more than enough. And the one that hit like a bag of gravel dropped from a shelf. Mom again, 8 days ago. It's not asking for money. It's letting her back into the family. She should be grateful we're even giving her this chance. Grateful. They wanted me to be grateful. For the privilege of being tricked into a 16-person dinner at a restaurant I couldn't have picked for myself, so I could pay a bill I didn't order, to solve a crisis nobody told me about, for a family that cut me off when I said no the last time. I set Brooke's phone back on the counter, screen down, exactly where I found it. I washed my hands. I looked at myself in that flattering mirror and I thought, I know what you're doing. I know what this costs. And for the first time in 15 years, I am not going to pay it. I stood in that bathroom holding the truth in both hands, and the strangest part was how calm I felt. Not numb, not angry, just clear, the way a kitchen goes quiet right before a dinner rush, everything in position, nothing wasted, every station ready. If you've ever found out you were loved for what you could provide and not who you are, you know exactly how cold that tile floor felt under my shoes. Stay with me. Subscribe, because what I did next, I planned in the time it takes to dry your hands. I walked back to the table with the same expression I wear when a health inspector arrives unannounced. Pleasant, unreadable, fully operational. Nobody noticed anything different. Aunt Linda was telling a story about her neighbor's divorce. Uncle Greg was working on his 3rd lobster tail. Brooke had reclaimed her phone from the restroom and was scrolling again, oblivious. But I noticed things now that I hadn't before, or hadn't let myself see. Mom kept glancing at Dad's wallet on the table, quick little flicks of her eyes like she was checking a countdown. Dad's laugh was half a beat too loud, the way people laugh when they're nervous and covering it with volume. The wine bottle, the second one, was nearly empty, and nobody had suggested slowing down. Because why would they? They weren't paying. I was paying. That was the whole point of the evening, and every lobster tail, every Wagyu slider, every pour of that $400 Bordeaux was another brick in the wall they were building around me, high enough that I couldn't climb out without making the scene I'd spent my whole life avoiding. I started asking questions. Casual ones, the kind you ask when you're catching up after 3 years and not the kind you ask when you already know the answers and you're watching people lie. How's the cafe, Brooke? Brooke's wineglass paused halfway to her mouth. Oh. We closed. Market just wasn't there. She said it fast, like pulling off a bandage she'd rehearsed removing. That's too bad. How long did it last? 11 months. Mom jumped in before the silence could settle. Brooke's exploring other options. She has so many talents. I nodded. Then I turned to Dad. How's the contracting business, Dad? Still doing the commercial builds? Dad's jaw tightened for half a second. A tell I'd cataloged before I was old enough to drive. Between projects right now. Economy's been tough. You know how it is. I did know how it was. I knew because I'd just read, "The bank called again Thursday," on his wife's phone 10 minutes ago, and because the dent in his truck was still there, and because the man who'd ordered 2 rounds of lobster and a $400 bottle of wine was sitting across from me performing Solvency the way a community theater actor performs Shakespeare, loud, committed, and entirely unconvincing to anyone who's seen the real thing. I just nodded and let them keep talking. People tell you everything when they think you're the bank. They told me about the kitchen renovation they'd put on hold, about the vacation they decided to skip this year, about how things have been a little tight, but nothing we can't handle. Every sentence was a window into a house I could now see was on fire, and they were all standing on the lawn pretending the smoke was barbecue. The pressure started building the way it always does in my family, not with a direct question, but with a current. Little comments that pushed in the same direction, casual enough to deny, coordinated enough to corner. Aunt Linda sighed and said, "It must be so rewarding, doing well for yourself like that. Some of us aren't so lucky." Cousin Tyler, who I hadn't spoken to since Obama's second term, chimed in with, "Yeah, Diana, you really landed on your feet. That's awesome." Even Uncle Greg, who normally communicates exclusively through sports metaphors, managed a, "You hit a home run out there, kid." Each compliment was a brick. Each brick pointed the same way. You have money, we see it, and we're reminding you in front of witnesses. Mom orchestrated from the center of the table like a conductor who'd memorized the score. A nod to Linda. A smile at Tyler. A gentle hand on Dad's arm when he started to speak too soon. She was good. She'd always been good. I used to think my mother was just a warm person who liked hosting. Now I understood she was a project manager with a 20-year track record, and her biggest deliverable was sitting at the end of the table drinking sparkling water. The dessert menus arrived. Aunt Linda ordered creme brulee without looking at the price. Brooke asked for the chocolate soufflé, which required a 20-minute lead time, which meant she'd ordered it before I sat down. Of course she had. They were running up the tab the way you run up a tab when someone else is paying. Without a ceiling, without guilt, without a single glance at the column on the right side of the menu. My sparkling water was down to the ice. Brooke was the one who cracked the surface. She'd had 3 glasses of the Bordeaux by then, enough to sand down whatever filter she normally kept between her brain and her mouth, which was never especially thick to begin with. She leaned across the table, glass in hand, and grinned at me like we were sharing a joke. "Relax, big sister, it's just dinner. You can afford it." I set my water down. Afford what? This. She gestured at the table. The platters, the wine, the 16-place settings, the creme brulee and chocolate soufflé currently being prepared by a kitchen that had no idea it was catering a shakedown. "We ordered the good stuff since you're treating." She said it so casually. Since you're treating. Like it had been settled in a meeting I wasn't invited to. Which, of course, it had been. The table went quiet for about 3 seconds, which doesn't sound long until you're the one sitting in it. Mom shot Brooke a look that said, "Too early," and Brooke shrugged like she'd bumped a vase she didn't plan to pick up. Uncle Greg studied his lobster. Aunt Linda suddenly found her napkin fascinating. Dad cleared his throat. The silence lasted long enough for Nathan to arrive with a fresh bottle of sparkling water and place it beside my glass, and for me to realize 2 things. First, that Nathan was the only person at this table who had poured me something without expecting anything in return, and second, that Brooke had just confirmed out loud what every single person in this room already knew. I was the mark. This whole dinner was a heist. And every lobster tail was evidence. What happened next was an accident, and I almost felt bad for Cousin Megan when it landed. She was trying to make conversation, genuinely I think, because Megan was the one family member who'd sent me a birthday text during year 2 of the silence, a short, thinking of you, that I'd never replied to, and still felt guilty about. "So Diana, Mom said you got a big promotion? Something about running a bunch of restaurants now?" I kept it simple. Regional Operations Director, 4 locations. Megan nodded, impressed. That's amazing. Like, you're in charge of all of them? Staffing, vendors, compliance, financials, everything from the loading dock to the check. I said it the way I'd say it in a meeting, factual, no polish. But the word financials landed on that table like a rock through a window. Aunt Linda's fork stopped. Uncle Greg looked up from his plate for the first time in 10 minutes. Brooke's scrolling thumb froze. Even Dad shifted in his chair, re-weighting, recalculating. They knew I was successful. They'd built their entire evening around the assumption that I was successful enough to pay. But hearing it, the scope, the authority, the specificity of what I actually did, was different from assuming it. They'd pictured me as a well-paid waitress who'd gotten lucky. They hadn't pictured someone who could read a P&L statement faster than they could read a menu, who managed vendor contracts worth more than their house, who knew exactly, down to the cent, what 16 lobster tails and 2 bottles of Grand Cru Bordeaux cost before the check ever arrived. The table recalibrated. I could feel it happening, like a change in barometric pressure. The power hadn't shifted yet, but it had loosened. Dad waited until dessert. He was strategic about it, I'll give him that. The soufflé had arrived, the crème brûlée was cracked, and the second bottle of Bordeaux was upside down in the ice bucket. The table was warm and full and slow with sugar and wine, and every face was soft with the particular satisfaction that comes from a meal you didn't pay for and don't intend to. Dad set down his fork. He folded his hands on the edge of the table, a gesture I'd seen him make before signing contracts, before delivering speeches at Thanksgiving, before telling me at 23 that he needed a co-signer, just this once. He looked at me. Not unkindly, not cruelly, with the particular expression of a man who believes he's being reasonable. Diana. He smiled. You're paying, right? You owe us that much. 5 words. You owe us that much. 16 people heard them. Nathan, refilling Aunt Linda's coffee behind me, heard them. The couple at the next table, pretending not to listen, heard them. My mother nodded. My sister smirked. My aunt reached for another pat of butter like the matter was settled. You owe us. 3 years of silence, and not one person at that table had said they were sorry, or that they'd been wrong, or that they'd missed me for any reason other than my credit limit. You owe us that much. I looked at my father across a table covered in the wreckage of a meal I hadn't ordered, surrounded by a family I hadn't been told was coming, holding a glass of water I'd poured myself, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. Because the decision I'd been afraid to make had just been made for me. I didn't answer right away. I've learned that silence does more work than words in a room full of people who are used to being agreed with. 3 seconds. 5. The kind of silence that makes a table of 16 people shift in their chairs and reach for their water glasses and suddenly remember they have something interesting to look at on the wall behind you. For 15 years, I'd paid so no one would make a scene. I'd picked up every check, co-signed every loan, covered every deposit and every dental bill and every florist invoice, because the cost of saying no was a room exactly like this one, full of staring, expecting faces, full of the unspoken understanding that Diana's love was measured in dollars and Diana's silence was purchased with compliance. 15 years, thousands of dollars, and the price of admission to my own family had just been announced to the room at roughly $80 a plate, plus wine, plus lobster, plus the particular tax that comes with being the child they only call when something needs funding. I looked at my father's hands, still folded, still steady. I looked at my mother's eyes, still warm, still performing. I looked at Brooke, who was already scrolling again because as far as she was concerned, this was decided. I looked at Nathan, standing by the service station, watching with the careful attention of a young man who knows something important is happening at his table but isn't sure what. Then I looked at my sparkling water, half full, catching the candlelight like a small, quiet promise I'd made to myself. I put my napkin on the table. I smiled. Let me go take care of things, I said, and stood up. Mom exhaled. Aunt Linda patted her chest. Dad unfolded his hands. Every single one of them thought I was going to pay. Here's the thing, 15 years behind a host stand teaches you. The person who controls the check controls the room. My family thought they controlled it. They'd set the table, chosen the restaurant, ordered the menu, assembled the audience, and delivered the demand. They had 16 people, 2 bottles of wine, and 3 years of built-up pressure on their side. I had 2 sentences and a waiter named Nathan. If a quiet boundary has ever changed your whole life, if you've ever walked into a room where everyone expected you to fold and you didn't, hit subscribe. You'll want to see how this one lands. I didn't walk toward the front register. I walked toward the service station at the back of the dining room, where Nathan was organizing check presenters, and a floor manager named David was reviewing a ticket. David wore the standard uniform, black shirt, black tie, earpiece, and he had the look of a man who'd been in the industry long enough to handle whatever walked up to him. I walked up to him. "Excuse me, David?" He turned. Professional smile. "How can I help?" I kept my voice low. Not dramatic, not conspiratorial. Just the volume you use in the industry when you're handling something that doesn't need the dining room's attention. Nathan was beside him, listening, eyes alert, tray balanced on his hip. Both of them looked at me the way restaurant professionals look at someone who speaks their language, with immediate, precise attention. I said 2 sentences. "I'm not the host and I won't be covering this table tonight. Please bring the full check to the gentleman at the head of the table, the one whose card is already on file for the reservation." David blinked once. He glanced at Nathan, then back at me. "And the second thing? Split off just my sparkling water onto a separate check, and add 30% to mine for your team. You've earned it tonight." Nathan's eyes widened slightly. David looked at me for 3 full seconds, reading the situation the way a good floor manager reads every situation, fast, thorough, without judgment. Then he nodded. "Done." That was it. No argument, no hesitation, no, "Are you sure, ma'am?" Because David had been doing this long enough to know what a redirect looked like, and Nathan had been watching that table long enough to understand why one was needed. I paid my check on the spot. 1 sparkling water, 2 refills, plus a 30% tip that would be the largest Nathan had received in a month. David ran my card, handed me the receipt, and said quietly, "I'll present the table's check in about 10 minutes, once the dessert course clears." Perfect. I walked back to the table, sat down, picked up my water, and took a slow sip. Brooke was arguing with cousin Tyler about a reality show. Aunt Linda was telling Uncle Greg about her neighbor's fence dispute. Mom was watching me with the careful attention of someone who thinks the check has been handled. Dad was leaning back, arms crossed, satisfied. 16 people, eating dessert, drinking the last of a $400 bottle of wine, waiting for a bill they had no intention of seeing. I set my glass down and waited with them. Those 10 minutes were the most peaceful of my evening. The table didn't know it yet, but the meal was over in every way that mattered. The food was eaten, the wine was gone, the ask had been made, and the answer had already been delivered in a language none of them spoke. I sat at my end and listened to my family talk. Aunt Linda complained about the cost of mulch. Uncle Greg told a fishing story that had no ending. Brooke took a selfie with the souffle remnants. Mom laughed at something Cousin Megan said. A real laugh, the kind that crinkled her eyes and made her sound, for exactly 3 seconds, like the woman who used to sing Dolly Parton in the kitchen. I almost felt something. Almost. But then I looked at Dad, who was checking his phone under the table with the tight-jawed focus of a man waiting for a text he didn't want to receive, and I remembered the message I'd read on Brooke's phone. "Diana can cover us through spring. She's got more than enough." My sparkling water caught the candlelight again. I watched the bubbles rise and pop, one by one, each one a tiny implosion that nobody noticed. I thought about 17-year-old Diana in her apron, carrying 4 plates up her forearm, learning to smile through the burning in her shoulders. That girl would have paid. That girl would have pulled out her card and covered the whole table and called it love and gone home and cried in the shower and never told anyone. I wasn't that girl anymore. Nathan appeared at the edge of the alcove, and I knew, before he took his first step, exactly whose chair he was walking toward. Nathan placed the check presenter, leather-bound, embossed with the Belvedere's logo, directly in front of my father. Not in the center of the table, not near me. In front of Raymond Mayfield, the man who'd made the reservation, whose card was on file, who'd told the table to put it all on this 2 hours ago. The table conversation died like a candle in a draft. Dad stared at the leather folio for 2 seconds. I could see him processing. The check was supposed to go to Diana. The check was supposed to go to Diana. The check is in front of me. Mom's eyes went wide. She looked at me, then at the check, then at me again, and for the first time all night her composure cracked enough to show the math running behind it. "Diana," she started. Dad recovered first. He was good at recovering. He'd spent 63 years never admitting he was caught off guard. He picked up the check presenter, opened it with a casual flick, and did not look at the total. He couldn't look at the total. If he looked at the total in front of 16 people, the performance would end. "I've got it," he said, pulling his credit card from his wallet with the same two-finger flourish he'd used earlier. He handed the card to Nathan without breaking eye contact with me. "We're celebrating, remember?" Nathan took the card. "I'll be right back, sir." He said it gently, the way you say things when you know what's about to happen, and the person you're talking to doesn't. Dad leaned back, crossed his arms, smiled at me with the full confidence of a man who believed his card would save him. Nathan came back in 4 minutes. He stood beside my father's chair. He leaned down and said, at a volume designed to be discreet, but heard by a table that had gone silent enough to hear ice melt, "I'm sorry, sir. The card has been declined." Nobody moved. Dad's smile held for one more second, a reflex, like a light that stays on after you've flipped the switch. Then it went out. "Run it again," he said. Nathan nodded. He disappeared. He came back in 2 minutes. Same lean, same gentle voice. "I'm sorry, sir. It's still not going through. Would you like to try another card?" Dad reached for his wallet. His fingers moved through the slots. One card, then another, then a third he pulled from behind his driver's license like a last bullet in a chamber he'd forgotten he loaded. He handed it to Nathan. The table was silent. 16 people. No forks moving. No wine being poured. No laughter. Just the sound of Raymond Mayfield's 63 years of pride compressing into a wallet he couldn't close fast enough. Nathan came back a third time. He didn't need to speak. His face said it. Dad looked at Nathan. Then he looked at me. Not with anger. Not yet. With the raw, unguarded expression of a man who has just realized in front of every person who matters to him that the net he'd been counting on was gone, and the ground was exactly as hard as he'd always feared. He looked at me the way you look at a lifeboat that's pulling away from the ship. I picked up my sparkling water, took a sip, set it down. "I don't owe you." I never did. Dad's chair scraped back against the hardwood with a sound like tearing paper. "Diana." His voice was low, controlled, shaking at the edges. "What did you do?" "I didn't do anything, Dad. Your card was declined. That's between you and your bank." "You were supposed to—" He stopped himself, but not fast enough. The sentence hung in the air, unfinished, visible to everyone. "You were supposed to pay." Mom started crying. Not the quiet kind, the performative kind, the kind with gasps and dabbing and enough volume to recruit sympathy from adjacent tables. "After everything we've done for you, after I carried you, how could you sit there and—" "What did you do for me, Mom?" My voice was level. I didn't raise it. I didn't lean forward. I stayed in my chair with my hands around my water glass. "Tell me, in front of everyone, what did you do for me in the last 3 years?" Brooke slammed her hand on the table. "This is so typical. You always have to make everything about you." Aunt Linda reached for my arm. "Diana, dear, your father is clearly embarrassed. Can't you just—" "No." One word. I said it the way I'd say it to a vendor who tried to short my invoice. Clear, final, and without apology. Then Dad broke. Not with anger this time. With something worse. His voice dropped, and for one moment, one terrible, honest moment, he sounded like a man standing in a house with the lights turned off. "Diana, please. We're drowning." I saw him. I saw the scared man behind the performance, the father who'd lost his business and his pride, and couldn't say it out loud until his credit card said it for him. I saw him, and I ached. Then he added, "And you'd let us?" And the ache stopped. Because even drowning, he was still reaching for my wallet instead of my hand. I stood up. Not fast. Not dramatic. The way you stand when you've made your decision and you don't need the room's permission to leave. "Dad, I'm sorry you're struggling. I mean that. But this—" I gestured at the table, the empty platters, the upside-down wine bottles, the 16 faces watching me like I was the villain in a story they'd rehearsed all week. "This isn't asking for help. This is a trap. You didn't invite me to make amends. You invited me to make a payment." Mom's crying shifted into something harder. "That's not fair, Diana. We just wanted you back." "You wanted me back for what I could cover, Mom." I read the messages. "She can cover us through spring." The table went white. Brooke's face drained. Mom's hand flew to her mouth. Dad looked at the tablecloth. If you need help, real help, I will sit down with you and a financial counselor and we will figure out a plan. No tricks, no audience, no lobster. But I'm not paying this bill. I didn't order it. I wasn't told about it. And I don't owe it to you. I don't owe you. I never did. Nobody spoke. I picked up my purse. I looked at my mother, and I said the last thing I would say to her at that table. You always told me family takes care of family, so why was I the only one who ever did? Then I walked toward the door, past the busser, past the hostess, past the heavy glass doors with the brass handles. Nathan caught me near the coat check. Ma'am? He was holding my receipt. Thank you, he said. Quiet. Sincere. I touched his shoulder. You're doing great, I told him again. Then I walked out. The parking lot was quiet. Thursday evening, warm air, cicadas starting up in the landscape trees that made the Belvedere look like it belonged somewhere more important than a strip mall. I sat in my car with the engine off and the window down and read the sticky note still pressed to my steering wheel. One dinner, then home. One dinner. I pulled my phone from my purse and opened the family group chat. The messages were already flooding in. Mom, Aunt Linda, Brooke, cousins I hadn't heard from in years, all of them typing at once. A cascade of exclamation points and accusations, and the particular kind of fury that only comes from people who've been caught. I didn't read them. I scrolled to the bottom, tapped Leave Group, and watched the notification confirm it. Diana has left the chat. I set the phone on the passenger seat. I started the engine. And I drove home in the same silence I'd driven there. Except this time the silence wasn't nervous. It was mine. The aftermath was quieter than I expected. No one called that night, or the next day, or the day after that. The group chat I'd left continued without me. I know because cousin Megan, the one who'd sent the birthday text, reached out separately a week later. I just wanted you to know, she wrote, that was the most honest thing anyone's done at a family dinner in 20 years. I'm sorry I was part of it. Megan was the only one who apologized. 3 weeks later, Brooke texted. Not to apologize. To ask if I could lend her first and last month's rent for a new apartment. I replied with the name of a financial counseling service and wished her well. She didn't respond. Through Megan, I learned the rest in pieces over the following months. Dad's contracting business had folded 18 months before the dinner. Bad bets on 2 commercial projects that went sideways. Mom had been covering minimums on 4 credit cards with a home equity line that was now maxed. The house went on the market in July. They moved to a smaller rental in a town 30 minutes south. Brooke took a job at a dentist's office answering phones. None of it was what I wanted for them. All of it was the consequence of choices they'd made long before I walked into the Belvedere, and none of it was mine to fix. I did what I'd promised at the table. I called Dad 6 weeks later and offered to sit with him and a financial counselor. He hung up. I haven't called again. But the offer still stands. I learned that the most expensive thing you can buy is other people's comfort with your silence. And the night I stopped paying for it was the night I finally got rich. That's my story. 16 seats, 1 glass of water, and a credit card that told the truth nobody else would. If you've ever been the family bank, hear me. Helping is a choice, not a debt. And a boundary doesn't have to be loud to be unbreakable. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.